Hello, I'm Sora Alexin, and this is Magic Lesson 180, the celestial language or angelic language. In Enochian magic, we use within some rituals what is known as the angelic language, secret language of the angels, or angelic secret language. It's referred to in a lot of ways. I get a lot of questions about this. The main one being, what can you tell me about it from your experiences? So we often translate this language in ritual and how we use it with our tablets and hermetic ceremonial magics, into the Western English alphabetic symbols, A, B, for purposes of creating those ceremonial elemental tablets, for instance. But the original form of the angelic language is entirely different visually. It looks more like sigil craft than lettering of any alphabet on the planet. It doesn't look like lettering or like the numbers we use. It doesn't look like our number system. It's very rich and complex and layered in contextualizations that can be obviously seen as applying directly to, geomancy and astrological symbols. Most powerful invocations are used in conjunction with angelic tablets, in this language for scrying. In the Western systems of Enochian Hermetic magics, that's where you'll see it or come across it. But let's begin here. People ask, is it a made-up language? Who made it up? Who created it? And although perhaps in some senses you run into a philosophical wall here in the abstract of all languages are made up, whether it was by, Razafel or a human, in some sense, anything used to take, a pure energetic idea form and make it into something tangible, which can then be expressed in an invisible way, which is magic in and of itself, of course. In that sense, everything is made up. Everything that comes from source is made up. But, it seems quite clear to those who study this system that it is not possible that it has been spontaneously created by a person. Because doing so, it just seems improbable in the extreme. The language was given to Sir Edward Kelly and Dr.Dee during scrying. I say given because, as written in Dr.Dee's diaries, found, in the spiritual and the astral, and given to them to be transcribed by celestial divine beings, angelic beings. So the first, response to when I would say something like that, what's your experience with it? Is it created? I don't believe so. This is how we look at it in the Hermetic tradition. People then usually go, well, then either, Dr. Dee or Sir Edward Kelly created it and then pretended to be receiving it in a vision. Again, that's very difficult. I see where you're going, and I, applaud your good judgment and good sense in playing devil's advocate and asking these questions. Always be seeking. But first of all, much earlier parts of this language exist all over the planet. There are words in the tablets of Enoch, in some of the very old barbarous tongue incantations that can be found in older grimoires. Some of the same parts of what Dr. Dee and Kelly wrote. So it's difficult to prove then that they made it at a later time when it was already, there's already evidence of it in human history. So, and in those times as well, whatever few records we have of where those symbols and images come from also seems to have, been transcribed from an exterior source than the person who was given these messages or these symbols. That's usually the history that's attached to these things. So, and that's very hard to get into, Enochian history and recording and documentation and, where you find different grimoires is all very dispersive. It's hard to draw together in a cohesive way, especially when you go through the Dark Ages and the Medieval Ages where there's such a mess. It's so... Anyway, let's say you then say, with your rational and logic, playing devil's advocate yet again, which is wonderful. Magic is not a cult. We applaud people who ask questions, who look at things from every angle, who keep seeking the truth. with analytic and, rational open-mindedness. So the next thing, someone might say is they were either lying, Dr. Dee and Kelly, or they had access to some earlier historic documentation or information. Maybe they found a few of these pieces, say from an old grimoire, and then built on it and claimed that they were making it up. So both Dr. Dee and Kelly did travel through, regions of Central Europe where they were received by multiple different great mystery school traditions and centers and Rosicrucian order members. And so Dee was, after all, one of the best and brightest of the Queen's court, or at least one of the most politically savvy and strategically strong. So he rubbed shoulders with many great individuals in the course of his studies and travels, and some of the most learned, open-minded, and least likely to be conditioned to, preset social mindsets and biases, those individuals of society that aren't conditioned to that, then and now tend to be members of great mystery traditions and orders, after all. So that just makes sense, right? Maybe John Dee and Sir Edward Kelly, they came into contact with pieces of, say, an Enochian tablet somewhere else, or perhaps the language itself, in a very occulted form of ancient Atlantean, or that they found hidden in a Rosicrucian's locked desk, or squirreled away in an ancient Egyptian occult temple library. Okay, perhaps, again, perhaps, possible, unlikely though, improbable. Well, one, for reasons I can't directly explain because it would take too long. It would take years. It would also violate some of my oaths. But the main reason is it would take years of every individual listening right now doing their own work on these subjects, which is what we do in magic during certain grades within different orders, to study these things for ourselves and to interpret them from ourselves. But I can tell you flat out, the divine celestial language is not Atlantean. I can tell you that. I know you have no reason to believe me. Until you go find out for yourself, I wouldn't expect you to. But if you're asking me directly, I can tell you definitively they aren't the same. One is not derived from the other. So the idea that they came across something and then derived this language from that, unlikely. It isn't to say that Atlantean isn't available to those who seek it, but this isn't that. The angelic language is not Atlantean. They didn't fully understand the angelic language. They had only very small pieces of it. So it's quite frankly like if someone were claiming, if you were all English speakers in a room, 100 of you, and you all spoke a little bit of Italian, you knew a few words, a few phrases, as in common parlance, as, many people do. But then a piece of Swahili entered the room on a piece of paper and went around the room. And the people who spoke a little bit of Italian, but English as their first language said, well, clearly, this is derived from Italian, right? Because they've never seen it before. They have nothing to compare it to, but they have this little bit of information on something else. Now let's say you're the only person, that 1 out of 100, so one, and there's 99 other people, but you're the one who actually knew and had seen some Swahili before to go along with the little bit of Italian you knew. Now right off the bat then, that they aren't the same and one isn't derived from the other and they in no way entangle themselves or, have their roots in each other. And you can tell that to the other 99 people all day, that these are not the same things and one can't be coming from the other. But the people who don't know any Swahili and therefore can't compare it for themselves, they might never be able to take your word on that. They might never trust you on that. They certainly have no reason to believe you on that. So, and unfortunately, perhaps for them and their journey, they're also unlikely to go and spend the time they need to spend learning it for themselves. So what's the point of carrying on that conversation, right? You could tell them, no, they aren't the same. Whether or not they believe you, not much you can do there. Pearls before swine, right? Meat for men, milk for babes. Atlantean isn't Enochian magic. It isn't Enochian angelic language. They are not the same. Moving on. So there's also no proof, nor has there ever been any proof, that Dee or Kelly took this language from some other place or order or someone's library or study, or that they found a part of it in a grimoire. Again, this language does show up in pieces throughout human history, so much earlier, but never whole, never thoroughly, not even in the structural outline that Dee and Kelly are able to present when they begin transcribing it, and not within the timeline where either Kelly or Dee may directly have come into contact with it, even as they were traveling, say, through Austria. That's the sort of thing that gets around in magic circles too. People say, oh, they could have taken it, and because it was stolen from, an occult, or they oversaw it in an occult, library or text, no one, said anything. Unlikely. If you know anything about the occult and orders and members of occulted societies and magic circles, look at what happened to Crowley, right? Word gets around. Maybe not publicly, maybe not out in the world, but definitely within those inner circles. If you were to take information like that and then spread it, or build from it and claim that you had just been intuitively given it, word would get around within the orders. And these great mystery traditions are great record keepers. We keep journals, we keep grimoires, we keep books of shadows, we keep copious documentation of events through history. So within the walls of any of these orders, you would then find some documentation, some record that sort of an accusation was being made against Dee or Kelly, or that someone noticed that they were remaking stuff from something older that they had seen possibly. And there's just no record of it. There's no comment in any diary, oh yeah, I had Dr. Dee over for tea a few months back. And can you believe it? That, I don't know, Laos, he stole a peek at my sacred occulted documents. I know he did, because now his buddy has created a whole full language based off what he saw here in my library. And he's claiming that Kelly just miraculously found the information in the astral, right? That would be recorded in someone's diary if that had happened. Can you imagine anyone not saying something if that had happened? Especially in these very high, royal, political, social strata that these people were working within. There would be a mention of it. And there is none. Absolutely none. So maybe not publicly, but within their own inner occulted circles and memberships, they would have said something. There would be documentation of it. Of course they would. There would have been fallout. It would have been recorded. And there's no record of anything like that. Not a single accusation, not a rumor, not a mention or a citation note in any of the great mystery tradition orders that Dee or Kelly had access to. So this was, the month, the year, the European holiday season when Kelly leaked ancient secret knowledge to the masses. It would be noted, and there is no note. So not likely. It's not likely. And it's, what we do know and have proof of is Dee's diaries, which are in the British Museum, which, contain a very rough, a very simple, barely an outline, almost a shell, but still a very legitimate outline of what we use in Enochian magics today as the angelic language. So that which Dee and Kelly wrote down is the same language, although it's much less of it. It's messier. It's full of mistakes, which would be strange. If it were fraudulent, if it were faked, if it were inauthentic in any way, there's mistakes that they didn't know that they were making that they documented into their work. So, like if you were to imagine a children's alphabet book, like one of those thin little alphabet books, which is, B is for ball, A is for apple, and the big pictures, and they're in every country, right? They're in every language. Take something like that and then rip it up, pull it apart, toss it in mud, drown it in a lake, and now try to read it, right? So you have maybe the word ball, but no picture, partial sentence structures, F, ish, fish, im for fish that swim or something. Maybe instead of is for cat, it just says is blank, blank, blank at, is a rat is what you end up with, a picture of an apple, but no word for that. Maybe you can't even tell it's an apple, but you can tell it's fruit. So pieces of a language, missing a lot of the structure and concepts, a lot of the syntax, that would make it very clear and very easy to learn and translate well. that's basically what Dee and Kelly managed to cobble together through their scrying events. It's what they were trying to pull together, and it's why it's so clear, even in Dee's diaries, that the language is full and deep and comprehensive, and it is a language with full syntax and grammar, and it's there, and we can know that by studying it, just based on what little they had of it, even though they were just, cobbling together this partial comprehension that they were gaining access to. In much the same way that if you were holding that very messed up and stained and ripped alphabet book in another language, you would know right off what it is. Even if it was messed up, even if it was torn up, even if it was illegible, you would know what it is, that artifact in your hands. You would recognize it for what it is, that it's a teaching tool, that it's the outline of something greater, that there's a full language and it's something comprehensive, but that it's just very hard to fill in the gaps for understanding without a lot more work involved. So Dee and Kelly did have parts of the angelic language, yes. Did they create it themselves or steal it? Unlikely. Again, there's speculation that, maybe Dee was taken in by Kelly, who was the one faking it, and made it up or remade it or something, I don't know, and then managed to convince Dr.Dee. Again, not very credible as a theory. Among other things, Dee, the amount of assassination attempts that he managed to, dissuade. This was a man of great intuition, great intelligence, a great reader of other people's personalities and characters. The idea that he would have been taken in by Kelly, who was an incredible, very good at creating fraudulent documents, among other things. But the idea that Dee didn't know that or didn't know who he was or what he was like, unlikely. But Dee was human, so let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say he made a mistake. He was charmed by Kelly. Maybe Kelly did manage to manipulate him. Okay, again, still not credible. Among other things, Kelly wasn't a very focused or responsible person. So that's hard to imagine him pulling it off. He was really good at, creating, say, again, fraudulent documents, but he wasn't a language expert. There's a big difference between creating a language and forging a signature. He wasn't even an English expert, even though he was an English gentleman. It doesn't even seem like he was very good at his own language. So it seems implausible that Kelly would have spent years before meeting Dee, maybe creating a full syntax-heavy, grammar-heavy language, and then hiding how good he was at things like that and playing stupid just to one day, trick someone, maybe if he ran into the correct circumstance. That's a Houdini level amount of preparation for a trick that you may never get to show anyone and that there's no payoff in showing. So why? And is it even possible for someone of such little focus and such little intelligent depth to go through that process? Again, unlikely. For comparison, think of great fiction writers that create languages, like Tolkien, like J.R.R. Tolkien created these rudimentary outlines of full languages for characters in his books, like the dwarves and the elves, right? He created languages, created some symbols and some syntax. Tolkien was a profound English pro, a profound and respected expert professor, and it took years. It took years for him to begin to do that. He started that book in those languages years in Letters to his Children before he ever even began creating a skeletal structure of those things. And those languages that he spent years on and he knew what he was doing and he was an expert, they do run into grammar problems and translation problems and multi-meaning chaos entropy from context oversights. It's very tough to create a language, a standalone language with full syntax and full context and all these other things. So, and especially on the off chance for no reason that you might be able to trick someone into thinking it's real later, very implausible that Kelly did that or would have even been capable of that. Honestly, the divine language, there isn't a human being on the planet that's capable of creating this language. And if you look at it, if you study it, you would know that as well. You will come to know that very quickly. So I have to throw some shade on that theory. It seems likely, given all other theories, that this information did mentally come to Kelly, and then Dee transcribed it. And they wound up with some errors and with some parts, just like the roots of other great languages. Not for nothing, even Christian Rosenkreutz, supposedly, again, difficult to prove, history a long time ago, but it's, when you're dealing with the cult, a lot of the history is hidden on purpose. It's, contained within its initiates and oral traditions, but that it said that it came to that order in much the same way, transcribing elemental tablets via intuition, or applied spiritual guides, and leading some individuals of that order to, reveal how the language could then be better translated, better applied, better used. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, so modern magic, Western ceremonial magic, they have a fully flushed out. So it's almost like Dee and Kelly had the bones of this system. Then you have some pieces of it popping up throughout human history, even in barbarous incantations much earlier. The Rosicrucians have some of it, but current Western magics that use it have this they filled in the gaps. They've really made it this very highly developed and layered language that's always been there, but now it can be comprehended, it can be studied, it can be applied. So supposedly, again, hard to prove, their knowledge of this same system, they could fill in the gaps, and it came from much earlier historically. In those tellings and the legends, it was German adepts of the Rosicrucian order that had letters. These materials were then found years later, and then people were able to spend years deciphering them, and then it came through the Rosicrucians, and it came into the Golden Dawn. And so no matter what, it's important to note that the Enochian angelic language, if you're going to ask me about it, I'm going to tell you it's a full real language. I do not think it was made up. I certainly don't think it was made by a human. It has visual interpretive layers of meaning. It's mind-blowing. When you even first begin to evolve into this system, it's breathtaking. There's no good way of describing this. Everything is contained in these symbols. Not just audio, mental idea, contextualization, language schema, like when I'm talking to you, but also visual schemas, symbolically, much like the layers of visual schema and symbols within the, say, Freemasonry. But then you also have color contextualizations that can be applied, these flash colors and vibratory energetic wavelength patterning that corresponds to everything inside of this language perfectly, flawlessly, and these symbolic meanings that are just wheels within wheels, relating to pentagram and hexagram rituals and different spatial ceremonial rituals, different dimensional spaces, talismatics, the Hebrew alphabet, again, the geomantic properties, Kabbalic prompts, tarot correspondences, flash correspondences, invocation harmonies, all caught up in this divine language. There's so many layers of meaning, it's impossible to fully describe it well. And it's difficult when you look at this, even a little part of it, to not fall into a spiritual state, to not, just because of, say, the visual inclination that you're coming into contact with by looking at these things, to then automatically begin to move beyond oneself, even if you're not trying actively to work with these tablets. So just looking at this language prompts spiritual inclinations, prompts subconscious evolutions, mental adaptation, mental ascension, thinking differently. This language brings that out of people. Or more than consciously. So no matter what you think about it, it does absolutely represent something very powerful. Whether you believe in it or not, when it comes to its representative manifestation, it is a powerful instrument. And it gives, being as powerful it gives very real, aspects or realities of other planes, direct access to internal planes and spiritual planes. if you use the system at all, you'll have no doubt about anything I'm saying. Much like when you begin real grounding practices and can physically feel energy, moving through you, that buzz of energy, the chi magic, that directable source energy, and you can feel it in your endocrine and your nervous system as well, that flow. Then you're standing there going, how does everybody not know about this? It's real. I can feel it. It's physical. It's factual. It's directable. How does everybody not know about this, not want to use it? Same thing in like invocation practices. When you begin to open up direct access to parts of your brain and diaphragm and musculature and skeletal system that you can then direct at will in totally new ways that you didn't know you had access to. That vibration you can feel in your bones, right? And all doubt gets blown out of the water that these harmonies are powerful things. And like, how is everyone not doing this, not knowing about this, the potential and the possibilities, and that you can gain access to new senses, new skill sets, even as a human. This is the same thing with the secret angelic language, with the flashing tablets, with the Enochian elemental tablets. Whether you're working with the language here or in the astral, all doubt gets removed the first time you usefully brush against the real power of these. I can't call it a tool. It's a divine language. The fact that you can really work with, again, this is a code word, divine, right? Code words in magic, but for lack of a better word, that you can directly come into contact with and work with the divine, it becomes obvious when you're using the celestial language. And then without a shadow of a doubt for yourself that it's not made up. It's not, just language or just a tool that someone made or that's been passed down through history. It's not just here on the physical plane, that it's something much more powerful than that. It's a genuine, it's a factual thing, again, code word, fact, genuine, present, functional, energetic matrix that you in your current reality are beholden to and in control of. One of the greatest mysteries of the modern world is this language, is this celestial language. It's part of the reason it is occulted, sacred, secreted knowledge. Because seemingly it has always existed as long as man has been on the planet, and there is proof of that. There may even be proof that before man had language, this was being inscribed in places randomly, dated to what seems impossible, unbelievable timelines. So far back enough that it doesn't make sense that there was a human being with thinking language skills to have written it, unless it was an image that spontaneously presented itself in their mind, and then they drew it out, even before they had their own languages. So it's always been here. Apparently, it's never been spoken anywhere on Earth by any mortal man, in any society, in any culture, nor completely translated or fully comprehended, even though we find it all over the globe throughout history on the entire planet. And again, not even in the Atlantean timeline, so it wasn't fully understood then. It certainly wasn't spoken. There's no culture that accounts for it. It doesn't track linguistically with the planet the way other languages do, and yet it has sentence structure, it has grammar, it has syntax. It can be translated into English, Hebrew, numerical systems for convenience's sake and our ability to use it, or any other language. It translates into everything bizarrely well, which in and of itself is very strange compared to evolutionary systems, adaptations, etymological properties of other languages throughout human history. So it's almost like this language is bigger, not just audio, not just visual, not just its symbol forms, but it's just bigger. It's bigger than any little language a human brain in a three-dimensional space, with two-dimensional retinal perception could create. And so it subsumes all other information into itself. It's almost like all information is codified within it. So was it given to the Etruscans, the Etruscans, pre-Rome, And again, to the Rosencreutz order later, Da Vinci went into a cave and came out changed. To Dee and Kelly again, and they record it very well that this was a celestial being that was speaking to them. It certainly wasn't spoken at any of these times, and yet these individuals are transcribing it. And every one of them is saying from a source that is not human. So there are parts, pieces, traces of it in the darkest corners, oldest religions, most ancient monuments of the world, but it's never been attributed to anyone or anything other than another plane of existence, passed into humans, but not made by them. Some of the words, again, I mentioned this, they pop up in Enochian antiquity, but not in a way that makes it seem probable that it was a living language even before Sanskrit. When you translate parts, just single letters, what we call the keys, key symbols of this language, you get the base phonics of all Buddhism meditative universalistic patterning, which is one of the deepest, most complex universalistic systems in the world, like the word Om. Okay? This language didn't give us Om. We didn't derive Om from it. One letter of this language translates into the single most comprehensive, powerful intonation of one of the oldest traditions in surviving memory. It also has, symbol letters that contain all of Alpha and Omega. So, one letter is the entirety of vast, comprehensive matrices of knowledge. Just one letter within this language, which again isn't actually in letters. It looks much more like sigil craft in its origin form. But we use it in letters so that we can comprehend it, so that we can apply it. So this language, this code of meaning conveyance, it seems very much to contain all other languages within it, all other data points within it, all sorts of different ways of interpreting ideas, not just through language within it, although no languages seem to have descended from it, nor has it ever been found used in even more than a few words or phrases, or in bare rudimentary outlines like what Dee created the alphabet on his table boards. Nowhere. Only little tiny bits and pieces where it was scried or received. If you go back in Enoch, yes, words of it, medieval and pre-medieval times, invocations from the Dark Ages, again, in the barbarous tongues, you'll find words of it, or partial root systems from it being used inside of those phrasings, but not from them and not of them. Himalayan mountains even, right? You'll find a word of it, just one word, hidden deep in an ancient mystery tradition as the title of a secreted priest form. And even they don't know where it came from. But nowhere all of it. Nowhere the language in full or in use. Nowhere the history or record of it being from anywhere traceable to anywhere other than angelic. A conversation, astral planes, spontaneous divine insights. Always that it was given to the recipient by a non-corporal or non-human or a spiritual entity or energy of some kind. Even Enoch, according to legend, only recorded what little he knew of it, etched these metal directions into columns to a very sacred vault where he hid other sacred mysteries. He entombed this priceless treasure, this little bit of it he had, because he was terrified that the knowledge, along with all the other knowledge he was responsible for, would be lost in the deluge in the Great Flood. And the vault was lost. In fact, Freemasonry, in part, is entirely descended. Let's call him the builder, right? Who later came upon that same place in intuition to then excavate and build. He was going to build there, but found the lost vault of knowledge, Enoch's vault, and these great hidden secrets, the great treasure hidden within, and then parts of this language, like many other very important symbol craft, were restored to the world via all of Freemasonry. So that's a little bit of history on the angelic language. I can't get into the specifics of its use it can be dangerous. It would violate my oaths. And again, there's a reason why in ceremonies we keep these things, in their lead-lined boxes when they're not in use, wrapped in black cloth. Just glancing at them can start changes in the mind that one of the great things about coming up through a magical tradition, the way you can best digest it and slowly absorb it, is to be able to comprehend it because you're working with it. You're coming into it in a safe way and in a holistic way. That's why you create your own tablets. That's before working with them. You really understand them. You really digest this information and then have the ability to contain and usefully apply these powers. Not doing so, since just looking at these things can begin changes in the psyche, can be dangerous. It can be harmful. That's why I'm not going to show you pictures of it, describe what every picture means. I'm not going to do that. I don't know who is initiated, who's prepared for that, who isn't. I would definitely, before ever doing that to someone, seek their permission before showing them things that are going to resonate in their subconscious, right? That's dark magic, doing that against someone's will or not warning them. So that's everything about the angelic language for today, and until next time.